The question that I have been asked, and probably most clergy have been asked most frequently over the course of 30-some years, people always, whether they know you well or they're in the church or sitting next to you on an airplane, they find out you're a minister, they turn to you immediately and say, "Whatever got you into that?" It's almost like you have a disease that you've caught, and they're curious how you got it because they're not really sure they want to sit next to you. It might be contagious. And to be honest, I always kind of duck or shy away from that because, not because there isn't a story there, but because most faith journeys, and mine is no different, is very personal and very private. It just is. It's something close to your heart, and it's not one thing or another thing. And for me, it was not necessarily a big thing, and it was not even something I embraced. It was something, and I think a lot of clergy will tell you, they're reluctant and reticent to accept and resistant to continue on. And yet, as I thought about Guillermo's installation this afternoon and how that's a part of his journey and his ministry, it made me reflect, and I thought maybe this would be an appropriate time to share a little of mine as kind of a testimony, kind of a witness. For you see, it wasn't something that happened overnight, and it wasn't something that was crystal clear. As I said, I was resistant because becoming a local church pastor doesn't just affect me, it affects my future spouse and my children and my family. Everybody's embraced by it, so it is not simply like having a job. Anyway, it began as two things, very disparate things, converged. And the first ones, many of you know, the first one was when I worked for President Ford. It started as a college internship. It was not because I had any great aspirations for him or for his campaign. I was a poli-sci major, a history major, and I needed the credit as well as I wanted the experience, wanted to see it. And that's the door that opened. Anyway, my responsibility came to be to organize young people for rallies so that when President Ford spoke or someone representing him spoke, the cameras always saw a lot of young people in the front of the auditorium waving signs. Now, if you don't think getting young people to cheer for Jerry Ford is a challenge, that's got to be one of the most difficult responsibilities anyone could ever have. He wasn't exactly a crowd or a barn raiser, you know? Not exactly. But that was my job. Well, after one state convention, I just happened to be at the exit, and all the cameramen and the newspaper reporters and television journalists and everyone, they're all there, and it was after Ronald Reagan has spoken, and of course he was the candidate opposing Ford at the time, and I positioned myself right in front of the ropes and watched him come out, and as he came out, I do not know what possessed me, but I stepped under the rope, stood right in front of him, and I said, "Mr. Reagan, if you're elected president and you start a war in Panama," remember the Panama Canal was the big issue at the time, I said, "are you going to come fight with me?" I was 21 at the time. You know, you say things like that when you're 21. And, you know, in typical Reagan style, he kind of did the head bob and smiled and said, "There won't be a war when I'm president," and we went on. Well, a few days later, or weeks later, I was called into a professor's office, and the professor was not there, but behind this desk sat a gentleman that I had never met before, and he asked me to sit down, and he said, "I'd like to talk to you." He said, "You're Keith Haemmelmann, you're from such and such, your social security number is this, your dad's name is Herbert, his social security number is this, your mother's name is this, my name is Arnold Pascal, I work for the president, and the president wants you to work for him." What do you say? What do you say? It changed my life because the next thing I knew, I was attached to Nola Harley. Her husband was a congressman, Southern California, and she was a White House staff assistant. Now, I share this because there is no greater power trip in this country than to be associated with the White House. In fact, the most coveted thing you could get from the White House was a name tag you put on your briefcase, because if it was on your briefcase, you could walk into any restaurant and get the best table without waiting at any time. Now, we laugh at that, but you get the seductive, you get it? The power that goes with that, as all of a sudden you are, they don't even know what you can do for them, but you're a somebody. And I didn't realize, how much power it was until we were, we were somewhere in the country, and at that time you didn't have cell phones, so you had a hard line. You had to bring the phone in. The president always had to have the red phone, the hot phone, right nearby. And Nola Harley was on the phone to AT&T, and AT&T is almost as powerful as the United States government. And I was so impressed because she says to the other person on the phone, she says, "I don't care what the problems are. The president wants it done, and he wants it done now." And it was done. It was done. Well, that was kind of my life, and I knew where I would work. If Ford had won, I'd been assured of a job in D.C., and so your life could be very different. But he didn't win. And many of the people I worked with immediately went to work for Carter. Because, contrary to what people think, most of the people who work for most of the candidates don't work for them, they work for them. But I just really wasn't very interested in that, and kind of drifted for a while. Had no idea. Had connections, but didn't know what it was all about until I got a call from another person who wanted to meet me, and we met at the Davenport Hotel, downtown Spokane, and he wanted something done. He was from Seattle. He wanted something done. He knew I had some friends in the governor's office at that time, and he wanted to know if I could help him make some connections. And he opened a briefcase, and in the briefcase, as he pushed it across to me, was $20,000. It's a lot of money when you're 21 years old in 1976. That's when the disillusionment of it all hit home. And I walked away. Months later, I received another call from a college professor who inquired as to whether I would be interested. He knew I was kind of drifting and so forth. He inquired as to whether I'd be interested in a temporary teaching job since I had a teaching certificate. He said, "It's north of Spokane, it's up in the mountains," and my clue to this whole thing should have been when he said, and they're having trouble keeping teachers there. But they paid $6,000 a year, so you jump at that, Anyway, I took the job, and it was an eye-opener because it, for the first time, made me realize how naive I am, and I would suspect most of us are. It was in the hill country. It was up in the mountains. And the people who lived there was an Indian reservation. There was a juvenile detention place. These were young people who weren't in prison because they were under 18. And then the residents who lived there, most of them did not have running water, indoor plumbing, or electricity. I had no idea that in this great country of ours, people still live that way. Anyway, I taught there, and they lived off what they could poach, literally. I mean, I went to school one day, and there's a deer that somebody shot hanging outside the school that somebody gutted. It was dinner. Okay. The first week I was there, a kid pulled a knife on me, another kid tried to hang another kid, and one kid threw a desk out the second-story homeroom that I had. And he and I came to an agreement he could sleep in my class if he never did it again. The interesting thing is, I grew to like the kids, and I grew to like the teachers. And I was waiting to marry my wife. She was still in college, so that was a little incentive there. Huh? But they worked with these kids, and it wasn't because of the job, and it certainly wasn't because of the money, and it certainly wasn't because of the prestige of who they worked with or where they taught. It may have been the first time in my life I'd seen people do real ministry. They did it to make a difference. And I stayed there for 2.5 years. And then I went to seminary. And the question, you see, at that point, as these two very disparate things began to converge, the question that went on in my mind was no longer, what are you going to do with your life, and what's it going to get you out of life, and what's it going to make you in life? That's not what it was. It was more about what will motivate you, what will inspire you, what will drive you, what spirit lives within you, what are the values that would determine whatever days you had ahead. And I chose parish ministry because in my mind, I saw the church as the one hope. I saw the church as the one institution that might be able to bridge these two different worlds, these two disparate parts of our society, which seem to be growing farther and farther apart from one another. The rich and the poor, those with high education, those with no education, those in our society who call the shots, and those in our society who live with the shots they've called. Who's going to bridge the gap? Who's going to step in the middle of that? Who is going to help these people not just talk at each other, but talk with each other and perhaps know each other and build a better society and world? Because, my friends, the church is not a static institution. The church is not a monolithic group. It is not the same creation week after week after week. Think about it. Every week we come and you reform the church. You reform community. You reform this dream of God for the world. And you come here, this is the only place in society where I have libertarians and socialists and Democrats and Republicans and evangelicals and conservatives, and I have Episcopalians and Quakers, and I got them all here. They sit next to each other. And maybe for an hour, they don't worry about their differences. They worry about that which they have in common, and they think, and then they act. And they act not upon party platforms or worldly agendas. They act upon the ideals and the calling of Jesus Christ. That crazy stuff that says the world should be where the first are last and the last are first and the master is the servant of all. The clarion call that we are given, not catchy phrases, not sound bites, but deep-seated purpose. That's what we do week after week. We are an invasion force of God in the world. Right here and now. Which is what I see Jesus' response to the Pharisees in our scripture is saying. Jesus says, I understand Herod's after me. I understand that what I am saying is threatening because it turns everything upside down and inside out. I get it. It is an affront to the powers that be. But it is my calling, he says, to challenge, to set right, and to exorcise the demons. The demons that exist in us, around us, and sometimes even through us. Friends, that's our calling and that's our challenge too. We are called to stand up, confront, and maybe, if we're strong enough, drive out the demons that haunt our times and tear at the fabric of God's dream of a world filled with compassion and hope, justice and love. We are called to confront and to name the demons of them and us. I'm right and you're wrong. Anger, hostility, tribalism, violence, and the worst one of all, I don't care. I don't care kind of despair. These are the spirits that become demonic in nature that are driving wedges between us, between families, between friends, in our community, in our nation, and in our world. And if the church, who hears the call of Christ to be one, is not committed to face Jerusalem and to confront them, this community that brings all these folks together, then where does the dream live and who's going to do it? I read an article, I think it was in the Huffington Post. I read an article, the title of it was the first time I'd seen anything actually kind of that grim, but the statistics were, is it too late for the mainline church to even survive? That the decline in Methodist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian, all these different, traditional American denominations, the break between older generation and younger generation, is it too late for it to even be saved? Which is kind of gloomy. And then Guillermo came into my office. We're doing this downtown thing. We're doing our best to try to reach out into the world and go into all the world downtown. Thursday night, 6 o'clock, be there. Anyway, he went downtown with posters and, of course, was taking around to places where people gather and so forth, and some of the younger crowd. And a lot of places you can't just put them on the bulletin board, right? You can't just walk in. They say you got to talk to the owner. Well, he talked to the owner and the one, and the owner looked at the poster, and the owner said to him, "Is this some of that religious blank?" Which it tells you where we stand. And he said yes. And she took it and put it on the bulletin board. And therein lies hope. Therein lies hope. The passion and the belief that the gospel still has power and significance for our world. The belief that though we are flawed, or that the church can be out of touch maybe with current trends in society, that we still have a mission and a significance and a role to play in our society. It has not died yet. And it has not, thank God, died yet. And we can't let it. One of my favorite stories, I'm sure I've told it before, but favorite stories are worth telling again and again. It's the story of a king in a kingdom whose country was going through all kinds of turmoil and unrest. There was economic distress, and there was political distress, and there were other countries buffering on their borders, and he couldn't get any rest, and he didn't know what he was going to do, and he found every day more and more difficult to get up. And so he commissioned the greatest artist in the land to come in and to provide a painting for him that was he could get up and look at every morning, and it spoke of hope. He said, "I need hope, so paint it." So the artist was away 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a couple months, and he comes back, and the whole palace is gathered, and the king comes in, and the artist proudly undrapes this beautiful painting, sky, blue, white, fluffy clouds, mountains in the background, gentle sloping hills, big lake, and cattle grazing sheep. And everybody else was so impressed, and the king stopped in front of it, and he looked at it. And he became angrier and angrier. And he says, "Take it away, take it away. This is not what I wanted. I want something I can look at that gives me hope. Take it away and do it right. Bring it back, or I will have your head." Kings can do that, 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, the artist creeps into the palace to show the king his next revision. And there's a hush in the gallery as he uncovers it this time. And this time it's very different. This time there are dark and scary clouds in the sky, and there are steep mountains with rugged rocks, and there is no calm lake down below. There's a river with rapids, and the water is rushing through it. But in the clouds there is this break. And a stream of light shines from up above down into the depths of that canyon by the river, where it hits a tree, a lone tree all by itself. And it settles in that tree on a bird. And the king takes a deep breath and he says, That's it. That's it. That's hope. The ability to sing in the midst of a storm. That's why I'm still here. That's why I got into it. That's why I'm still here. Because I tell you, the forces of the world, the voices of the world, the forces of Herod are still out there. They are still out there, and each of us and all of us struggle with the demons that they feed. But Christ is there too. And in the midst of the storm, Christ still calls us to sing. What are we going to sing? And what is the Spirit we allow to be in us that makes that music for the world? Amen.